Be yourself is the biggest lie we've been told. A phrase so common, so casually offered that we forget to question it. It carries a quiet violence, the assumption that there is a self beneath all this. We are told to peel back the layers, to dig, to reflect, to uncover something authentic beneath the noise. But here's the trouble. What if there's nothing underneath? What if the more we peel, the less we find? What if the true self is not some hidden essence, but the mask that stayed on too long? We tend to think of masks as deceptive, but history tells another story. For thousands of years, the mask was not a lie, it was the truth made bearable. A role worn in ritual, a station held in society. You were not you. There was no finding yourself. There was only fulfilling what the world had already written. You were daughter, craftsman, priest, widow, king, and maybe that was a kind of freedom too. Today we mock that rigidity. We call it repressive, traditional, but in our supposed liberation we have crafted a new burden, authenticity. We no longer inherit a role, we must invent one. We are told to be ourselves. So we perform sincerity. We rehearse spontaneity. But performance is not the problem. The lie is that there's something beneath it. There's a problem. The deeper we look, the more the mirror looks back. The more we search for ourselves, the more we construct what we wish to find. And no myth captures this collapse more precisely than that of Pentheus. Pentheus was a king. He believed himself rational and orderly. When Dionysus, god of chaos, masks, and frenzy, arrived in Thebes, the city erupted. Women abandoned their homes. Madness spread like smoke. Pentheus refused to yield. He saw it all as a kind of disease. His plan was simple: observe, expose, and contain the madness. He was to go to the mountains, watch the Bacchic rituals, and emerge unchanged. But Dionysus is not a god you observe. He is a god you become. So the god offered him a disguise, a woman's dress, a wig, a veil. Pentheus puts it on, not out of belief, but control. He thought the mask a tool that he could wear and remain untouched. That's the first mistake, because in myth, as in life, the mask is never neutral. Come, climb this tree, Dionysus says. From there, you will see everything. And from that height, Pentheus becomes the spectacle. The women, maddened, divine, possessed, see him not as a king, not as a man, but as a threat, as prey. They rip him apart, limb from limb. His own mother leads the slaughter, not recognizing her son. Pentheus dies in the very costume he thought he controlled. Torn apart by the performance he believed he could watch from a distance, Pentheus believed himself to be separate. In the end, his refusal to recognize Dionysus, his own inner chaos, provokes his self-destruction. Being yourself in its rigid form rejects complexity until it snaps. He believed there was a clear line between role and reality, between actor and audience, between mask and man. There isn't. Today we promote introspection as the path to authenticity. Journals, therapy, personality tests, the illumination of the true self. We believe authenticity is something found rather than something that is built. The French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan warned us. His mirror stage theory describes how the infant first forms a self, not from interior experience, but from seeing its reflection. That image is whole, integrated, and composed. But the child doesn't feel that way. It feels fragmented and vulnerable. So it clings to the image. It says, I am that. Thus the ego is born, not from truth, but from illusion. The first self is a mask, and every self after is a refinement of that mask. Now pair this with modern psychology. In 1977, Nisbet and Wilson ran experiments on introspection. They asked subjects why they chose one object over another. why they behaved as they did. The answers were fluent, confident, but wrong. The participants invented rational explanations for decisions made unconsciously. Not lies exactly, but narratives. The mind's best guess dressed up as certainty. We do not know ourselves. We story ourselves. We mistake narration for knowledge. Even Sartre, in his grim clarity, knew the self was a role. His famous example, the waiter in the cafe. The cafe waiter is playing at being a waiter, but convinces himself he is the waiter. His role becomes his identity, not inauthentically, but visibly rehearsed. The lie is not in the role. The lie is in believing he is nothing but the role. We live in masks, and that is not the problem. The problem is believing the mask is the face. The myth of Pentheus reminds us, the moment we believe in that mask as our skin, we risk losing ourselves entirely. Identity is recursive. It loops. The self you see is shaped by how you see it. The mask is not separate from the face. It grows into the skin. So we circle back to the question, what do you see when you look inside yourself? A truth or a mirror? A core or a costume? Perhaps a split between them. Oscar Wilde once wrote that to know exactly what you want to be is to become it, and in doing so to limit yourself. Wilde's life was not one of self-acceptance in the therapeutic sense, but of self-creation. He wore his identity like velvet, extravagant, deliberate, and suffocating. To be wild was to perform wild, and in time the act became inseparable from the actor. When the curtain fell, in prison, alone, he wrote not as the man who had finally found himself, but as one who had exhausted the roles available to him. The mask hadn't slipped. It had become his face. Some people, by temperament, habit, or culture, move through the world without interrogating each gesture. They perform their way into being. Their thoughts do not double back. Their identity is cohesive not because it is deep, but because it is unexamined. But others are shaped by different forces. In modern conditions, urban, digital, post-industrial, a large part of the population becomes psychically split, aware not just of what they do, but how that doing might appear. They grow up documenting themselves, performing childhood for a camera, narrating adolescence to an audience. Even solitude is observed, even grief is staged. The self is no longer a unity. It is a media object, and the more one reflects on it, the more performative it becomes. This is not performance in the theatrical sense, but performance as hyper-consciousness, the act of watching oneself live. The internal gaze becomes more relentless than the external one. Under such pressure, many individuals do not develop richer selves. They develop more brittle ones. They begin to question the sincerity of their own emotions. Joy feels staged. Sadness becomes suspect. Even pain is not safe because it might merely be the enactment of a self who wants to be seen as wounded. There is no trust in one's own inner voice, only the echo of the question, am I really like this? Or am I just playing the part of someone who is? And this doubt multiplies exponentially. Our institutions don't help. Social media demands identity be presented in slices. Therapy often enshrines narrative over reality. Even philosophy in some hands becomes a maze, where every answer leads only to more refined forms of doubt. And so the modern subject becomes a curator of their own disintegration, unable to verify what authenticity even means anymore. They seek to know themselves, but cannot escape the suspicion that the self they seek is only a reflection of the seeking. These are not neurotics. They are the natural product of a world obsessed with the inner life, but equipped only with mirrors. The modern subject is told to find a self, to express it, to stay true to it, as though stability could be extracted from the chaos of time and context. Yet no civilization before ours insisted so loudly on the permanence of identity. Traditional societies understood the self not as an essence, but as a posture, bound to stage and season. A name was not a self. It was a function, an invocation, sometimes even a disguise. It changed with kinship, age, ritual, or war. Today it is the self that polices itself, endlessly monitoring for flaws, contradictions, inconsistencies, a tyranny dressed as introspection. And in this loop, in an effort to be true to oneself, behavior is filtered. Every gesture weighed against an imagined essence. One does not simply grieve. One must grieve in a way that is consistent with who one believes oneself to be. Psychologically, most selves are plural. There is no pure I beneath the roles, only the arrangement of those roles in response to circumstance. A teacher does not speak like a father. A lover cannot speak like a leader. Integrity lies not in sameness, but in knowing when to shift and why. No mask lasts forever. The human face was never meant to be singular. To be oneself, then, is not to return to some inner origin. It is to navigate, to move between roles with awareness, to understand that the desire for a true self is not always a call to freedom. Sometimes it is a retreat from responsibility, from the labor of change, from the difficulty of becoming. And perhaps that is the hardest truth. There is no arrival, no moment when one becomes complete, fixed, resolved. There is only the ongoing negotiation between selves, some inherited, some invented, some imposed. What remains constant is not identity, but attention and accountability to those roles and to those who bear witness to them. In the end, the phrase "be yourself" is not wrong. It is simply unfinished. Be yourself, but know the self is many. Be yourself, but not only yourself. Be yourself and let that self be questioned, broken, and remade.